Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Yissilmissil Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissel, and today we're continuing our deep dive series into the Bermuda Triangle. We're continuing from where we left off last time with Chapter 3 in the Bermuda Triangle II book by Gian J. Quasar. So I hope you had a good week. And if you missed Tuesday's show, I highly recommend to go check that one out. The Coral Castle Deep Dive series that we do on Tuesdays. This past episode, we talked about the Philadelphia experiment. So it's definitely worth checking out. I learned some new things with that show as well. And in the chat here, we have Lerny, Texas Lerny. Good to see you here. And yeah, it feels good to be doing lives again. So thank you for being here. We keep moving forward. That's what we do here. So today we're covering Chapter 3. Alright, this is going to be a short chapter, thankfully. So, might be about an hour-long show. And I just realized I do not have the background ambience music going. So here we go. And by the way, this is music from White Bat Audio on YouTube. So if you like the music being played here, I do have each playlist that I use in the description, and I normally update it after I end the live so that you know exactly what music I used if you want to go listen to it again on your own. But we'll be covering Chapter 3, Over a Past Horizon. I see Zen Ray's in the chat here. Welcome, welcome. And by the way, everyone, we do have memberships for the channel. I do this as a way to help move the channel along. Obviously, I have to actually be here and do all of these lives. And it's not an AI doing this. And I had to acquire all the material for these series to read them the way that I do. And it is work to do this in a way, but this is also my passion. So, I mean, I would do this with no live viewers, which in some cases that's how it is here. From time to time. And it's nothing on you guys. This is what YouTube's doing to me. I can't do anything about it. Got over 2,000 subs. Maybe 10 people watching at once. Sometimes one. It doesn't matter though. Because the thing is, you guys are watching this either live or, for the majority of you, you're watching this after it's live, which is alright. But it's something I'm aware of, so that's why we have memberships to help support this channel, help it grow. Alright? And I thank each and every one of you for your support. And that's really all I have to say with all of that. It's a shame that I can't get the reach that others have the benefit of. Yeah, Lerny says, I barely get notifications with your lives. Not your fault, though. Yeah, thank you, Lerny. Yeah, it just is what it is. I have subscribed... I've subscribed to so many channels over the years. I go through, like, a culling of my subscriptions every few months. But like, I can't even keep up with the subscriptions I currently have as a viewer on YouTube. So it's just a pick and choose type of thing. If I could scroll back over the past 3 days of subscription video uploads, I might watch 5 to 10% of them. So that's just the current reality right now. But that's why we have a replay for the lives. We don't let this just go away. And we do re-uploads as well, with a little editing, tightening up, nothing too major. But this is what I try to, I just try to make sure we have a digestible format here. So, let's jump into this, shall we? We're almost at 10 minutes in. But, I guess one more time to mention about the subscriptions. I have 2 different tiers right now, and there are member-exclusive videos and series that I need to update on as well. It's gonna keep going forward. I just need to make the new installments. So my apologies to the members with not keeping up on the Great Lakes Triangle. It's just so much information each time we do these shows. And Coral Castle and Bermuda Triangle are already overlapping each other. So the Great Lakes Triangle series, that kind of, my brain just couldn't separate it for however many months now. But we will make sure to get more parts added to that series. There's only 1 book in that series we're covering right now. It might go up to 7 parts, and then I'll have to look at my other Great Lakes books that I have. I have so many shipwreck books from the Great Lakes, and I guess it's just determining whether or not they're supernatural or something with the energy grid. Some of these are just shipwrecks that got lost to violent storms, and it's not a pretty thing. The shipwrecks are plenty in the Great Lakes, unfortunately, especially Lake Superior. The Great Lakes Triangle focuses a lot on Lake Superior. I'll tell you that much. But let's get started here. So, Chapter 3, Over a Past Horizon. Since centuries have passed from the time the New World has been discovered, and hence the seas of the Bermuda Triangle have first been sailed, one might assume that the number of ships that have gone missing in that infinitely larger span of time, by comparison to the last few decades, would be enormous. While this may be true, the lack of record keeping and the conditions under which existing records were originally made only afford us a glimpse, perhaps at only a few footprints, of what we must assume is a longer trail. And I agree with that. Think of how many stories about the Bermuda Triangle there are out there, and then how many got reported back. There's some of these things where it's civilian boats, it's not military, where it's put into the logs. Sometimes you just have missing people and missing boats, and no explanation and no shipwrecks, as we've found out going through all this. So it's not too far-fetched to say that there's a lot of disappearances that are not documented, and this has probably been happening for a long time. And for those of you who like to look at the different explanations for why our region is the way it is, those Great Lakes might not have always been lakes. the official story is glacier melt going down through the Mississippi Valley, but there's other interesting observations that the Great Lakes could be the result of a completed mining operation, and then it was backfilled with water from either groundwater, or they let the ocean water flow in, but then it would be salt. So that doesn't make sense to me. Either way, the Great Lakes are very mysterious, and there's a lot of accounts on the Great Lakes that are, we just don't know their stories. And the same thing goes for the Bermuda Triangle. But let's get back into this. Even if records were easily attainable, the data to make them worthwhile to the modern compiler could only have come from the existence of wireless and radio on the ships, so that some idea of their last reported position could be fitted with some precision to the location of the modern triangle. This obviously was not the case. Those accounts of missing ships that come down to us prior to radio or wireless are those that were preserved in independent written histories. Many of these cases are quite intriguing, as you might imagine, since the very reason they were preserved in literary sources is because some element in them had stood out and was deemed worthy of comment, meaning the most bizarre cases are those that are preserved, but also the very ones suspect to having fallen victim to embellishment. This, of course, makes it problematic when using their details to fit them into any theory. On its own, a mere litany of triangle cases only serves to impress upon how frequently the unusual might strike. This is because in most cases there are simply no real details to confirm or deny anything but total disappearance. The expression of such an attitude does not minimize the tragedy that is presumed in all these cases. It is merely a fact that without any details it is impossible to draw any definite conclusions other than those that accept general location and total disappearance, neither of which are enough to fit the cases into a greater mosaic that may serve to reveal a common cause. Yeah, again, if you haven't watched Tuesday's show on the Philadelphia experiment in the Coral Castle deep dives, please go do that, like, by next week. The whole idea of time displacement is covered there, and it does touch upon the Bermuda Triangle briefly. But it's not anything I have a solid answer to. We have energy pockets that obviously cause these unusual situations. As generally as I could quote that, you know. But I think we kind of understood this with, like, researching the energy grid. There's something very anomalous going on. Whether some of these seasoned researchers are saying it's a collection or a cluster of miniature black holes, that's one theory. Another, which was from Tuesday's show, is that the Bermuda Triangle is an ether. It's the ether of our realm. It's like more concentrated life source there. So it's very anomalous as well. Alright, but continuing on. And hey, Missing Time, good to see you here in the chat. Good to have you here. There is one There is one exception within the annals of shipping that allows the biographer of this sea to set a greater degree of certainty as to the level of the unusual and as to the location where a vessel met its mysterious fate, or, more accurately in this instance, where the crew met mystery. Where the crew met mystery. This is the phenomenon of derelict vessels. Short of radio and wireless, this was the only way in the days of tall ships and stout lads that one could firmly attach a location to the point where an ominous fate had intervened. And here we go. We're going to start reading these different accounts. There's more ships here. We're going to listen to their stories here. The 222-ton French frigate Rosalie is reasonably the first derelict to be documented as a mystery ship in the Triangle. This, of course, was due to the fact that she was one of those cases that stood out, plus the fact that a reporter was close at hand when the vessel was towed into Havana. It wasn't long before the account reached London, and there appeared the following in the London Times in August of 1840. A singular fact. So this is the London Times article. A singular fact has taken place within the last few days. A large French vessel bound from Hamburg to Havana was met by one of our small coasters and was discovered to be completely abandoned. The greater part of her sails were set, and she did not appear to have sustained any damage. The cargo, composed of wines, fruits, silks, etc., was of a very considerable value, and was in most a perfect condition. The captain's papers were all secure in their proper place. The only living beings found on board were a cat, some fowls, and several canaries half dead with hunger. The cabins of the officers and passengers were very elegantly furnished, and everything indicated that they had only recently been deserted. In one of them were found several articles belonging to a lady's toilet, together with a quantity of ladies' wearing apparel thrown hastily aside. But not a human being was to be found on board. The vessel, which must have been left within a very few hours, contained several bales of goods addressed to different merchants in Havana. She is very large, recently built, and called the Rosalie. Of her crew, no intelligence has been received. And I believe that is the end of that article there. Attempts have failed to link the Rosalie as being the Rossini, a derelict that was not so mysterious after all, since she had gone aground in Cuba, and her crew had rowed to shore. When the actual records were uncovered detailing the construction of the Rosalie and her launching in 1838, it was confirmed they were two different ships. Instinctively, it would strike the observer as a phenomenal coincidence that two derelict vessels could be found near the same area of ocean, near Cuba in this instance, at the same time. But as more data has surfaced from the 19th century, the likelihood of several derelicts being found in the same area does not seem so remote a possibility anymore. This data comes from the study of abandoned vessels done under the aegis of the U.S. Hydrographic Office. Headed by Commander Charles Sigbee of the U.S. Navy, the research concentrated on derelict vessels of the North Atlantic. Over the 7-year period, from 1887 to 1893, the study extended. The data it had gathered not only revealed the large number of deserted vessels that were afloat at any given month of the period in question, but the study was the first to note that the epicenter for the deserted vessels was the area delineated today for the Bermuda Triangle. In order to fully appreciate Sigbee's work in context to the modern triangle and its intriguing ramifications, we must first draw our attention to the North Atlantic. At its center is the Sargasso Sea, a warm body of water largely created by the interlocking and swift currents of the combined Gulf Stream. This sea is essentially elliptical in shape and occupies the central North Atlantic Ocean between 20 degrees and 35 degrees north latitude and 30 degrees and 72 degrees west longitude, roughly starting a few hundred miles off the U.S. East Coast and extending into the eastern Atlantic. Ever since the Spanish treasure armadas, ships have used this surrounding powerful Gulf Stream and its associated currents, the North Atlantic Drift, Canary Current, North Equatorial Current, and Antilles Current, to hasten their journey back to Spain or Europe. And this says the Gulf Stream and the North Atlantic Drift in parentheses. And back again to the New World, or the North Equatorial Current and the Antilles Current in parentheses. Experience, however, taught them to avoid the Sargasso Sea, for it was a place of unexplained calms and weak, indolent currents. Before discovering its starkly different features as compared to the surrounding currents, the Spanish fell victim to the deadly calms. Today, this area is still called the Horse Latitudes because the Spanish conquistadors, becalmed for weeks, had to cast over their war horses in order to conserve water as they prayed for the wind to return and guide them out. These seas are also called the doldrums, from which we developed the word for an inert, heavy depression. The Sargasso Sea remains one of nature's greatest oddities, for while the North Atlantic is cold and tempestuous, the Sargasso Sea is largely an immobile body of warm water. Its relative calmness may largely be the result of the surrounding and interlocking currents. But these currents have not created the Sargasso Sea's most visible oddity. A unique form of seaweed grows over its surface called sargassum, from which this sea gets its name. In no other place in the world does this particular seaweed grow. It floats because of little grape-like pods on its stems. Bunches float idly with the soulful stillness of the lazy swells. Huge mats can cover acres. It doesn't venture oft into the conveyor belt of currents around the sea. Rarely are clumps of it found in other parts of the ocean or washed upon windward shores. It grows here and remains in its native environment. And we have a map here to show. So this caption says, "The dammable Sargasso Sea occupies the heart of the North Atlantic Ocean. Sailing ships eventually used the currents around it rather than sailing through it." So just briefly here. We have the Azores. That's the Sargasso Sea in the center there. And then just above that is Bermuda. Picturesque stories tells us of I'm sorry. Picturesque stories tell us of deserted ships found idling through its realm. Becalmed, their fate was to forever remain in its limbo until the crew died and rotted and the vessels became eternal ghost ships. Paintings show ancient galleons next to rusted old steamers. Such paintings are wonderful metaphors, but they are not entirely false. They are artistic distillations. They condense the Sargasso Sea's enduring aura into one powerful image. Doubtless galleons did not remain until the days of steam, but it is not fancy that every form of ship known to us has been found drifting in the Sargasso Sea's eerie solitudes at one time or another. Paradoxically, however, as famous as the Sargasso Sea has become in sea lore, Sigsbee's work reveals that much of its legendary aura is stolen. Derelict vessels, especially during the heyday of sail, were actually more common outside of it. Over the 7 years which Wrecks and Derelicts of the North Atlantic was compiled by Commander Sigsbee, 1,146 unidentified derelicts were reported and 482 identified vessels. The sum total for only those 7 years was 1,628. That is a lot of missing ships. I just wanted to see briefly what the average of that is. That's 232 ships a year. That's 19 ships a month. Or 4 to 5 ships per week over those 7 years. Imagine every week you have 4 to 5 ships go missing. That's a lot of ships. That's a lot of time spent building those ships. That's a lot of man hours. That's a lot of weight equipment. There's tons. Some of this is 222 tons. They're shipping grains. They have living quarters. They're on the sea for months. 4 to 5 ships per week gone missing under Sigsbee's research here. In noting the location of these vessels, Sigsbee declared, quote, "Pilot charts show that most of the derelicts are sighted in the Gulf Stream off the United States coast, north of 30 degrees north latitude, and west of 60 degrees west longitude. The number gradually decreases to the eastward along the transatlantic steamer routes. A number of those which remain afloat the longest time make the circuit of the Sargasso Sea. The majority of the derelicts were vessels which were abandoned near the United States coasts." End quote. A better delineation for the heart of the Bermuda Triangle cannot be imagined. Ironically, the Triangle's modern reputation grew out of journalistic embellishment of only 50 or so missing ships and about 20 missing aircraft. This number, paltry compared to actual statistics, was enough to excite the world on the prospects of an eerie area of ocean where unexplained disappearances predominated. We have conceived theories of alien abductions and wistfully contemplated supernatural explanations. But the Bermuda Triangle, if defined solely as a place where more disappearances of ships and crew occur, has its origins squarely rooted in fact. If only 5% of the derelicts in Sigsbee's study were truly caused by some unknown agent, then the crews of 80 vessels must be added to the Triangle's litany of victims for just those 7 years. While the 19th century statistics on derelicts do not address the cause in each case, they do justify the modern Triangle's enigma as a place of mystery. Even if the vast majority of these 1,628 derelicts have a known cause, where crew and captain escaped to tell their tale, it is still amazing that it is here where seamen forgot their senses and abandoned a sound ship more than any other place in the North Atlantic. And I just want to mention again, this is just derelict ships. So the ghost ships, the ones found with nobody manning them. That's the 1,628 number. So that's not even accounting for ships that completely disappeared. That's a whole different number. Out of all the vast North Atlantic, it is here where crews leapt from their vessels or mysteriously vanished. Either they flung caution and experience to the wind here more than other places, or some mysterious fate befell them. It is interesting to note that Sigsbee's breakdown of the derelicts by flag reveals that although American and British ships were the higher percentage, and the numbers are 160 American ships and 134 British ships, some 95 Norwegian ships, 24 German ships, 20 Italian, 11 French, 10 Swedish, and even 9 Russian ships, among other nationalities, joined the list of vessels where their crews fled safe ship for treacherous waters. And that's another thing. When you're on the sea like that for months on end, your only safe haven is that ship. So whatever causes these people to abandon ship, it must do something to their psyche. Something must be happening. We go back to some of the earlier installments in this deep dive, and we were talking about how different minerals that are running through the rivers of the U.S., as they empty into the Atlantic Ocean, there are several chemical reactions that happen, where ultimately, after like 5 or 6 different reactions, the some of the material from those riverbeds turns into mercury. So it's not just human pollution. There's naturally occurring mercury that enters into the ocean, or turns into mercury by the time it's in the ocean. And mercury is very receptive to radio signals. So I wouldn't put it past these people on the ship, if they were hearing something in the water, and it could have been other radio signals that were bouncing off the mercury in the water. But they could have been, to them it could appear or sound as if somebody's calling to them from the water. And maybe they all jumped in to try to save who they thought was in the water, calling out to them for help. It's a lot of weird stuff happening. Since some 316 ships were reported floating keel over, or upside down, we can tentatively reduce the number of ghostly sailing ships. However, we cannot be sure if some of these capsized hulks were derelicts that were later keeled over by storm. Therefore, it is not certain whether the ships were abandoned and drifted sometime before storm later capsized them. That seems like some spelling error in the chapter. 6B notes that the number of derelicts increased over the 7 years of research. Quote, "This increase is probably not so much the increased number of derelicts, but it is due to the fact that this office has gradually increased the efficiency of its ocean patrol through its constantly increasing number of voluntary cooperating observers. This feature is exemplified by the fact that in 1893, there were 312 unidentified and 106 known derelicts, or a total of 418, and an average of 35 per month. And since the average length of time a derelict remains afloat is 1 month, it is evident that there must be 19 derelicts constantly afloat on the northern Atlantic." So we can just roughly assume, as of right now, while I'm speaking, there's about 20 or more or less, around 20 derelict ships just floating in the Atlantic. And I do want to say this is an ongoing thing. So as I'm speaking now, there's most likely 20 derelict ships on average in the Atlantic Ocean. Just sitting there. Not found yet. Prior to 1893, this was estimated at 16, but fuller reports are received now than in former years. End quote. And I see Juan Avila's in the chat. Good to see you here. Thanks for being here. This minor increase indicates that Sigsbee's work is fairly reflective of the actual number of derelicts in the Atlantic for those decades before and after. The evolving efficiency of Sigsbee's office also indicates that many times the crew must never have been heard from again, else reports would have been more consistently recorded and obtainable from some source, regardless of the Hydrographic Office's personal network of observers. An example of how accurately Sigsbee's calculations must extend backward in time can be found in the transatlantic encounters of the bark Abd el-Qadir. And this is a hyphenated word. ABD-EL-KEDER. On March 8th, 1873, just north of the Sargasso Sea, she came upon the abandoned Robert C. Winthrop. Captain Sparrow boarded with a prize crew and discovered all sails set except the main topsail, which had been blown away. 4 feet of water was in the bilge, which was determined by sounding the ship, and the boats were gone. So the lifeboats were gone. Yet Sparrow reported the ship was perfectly fine and manageable. Before he could determine whether he wanted to put a prize crew on board and sail her to their destination, which was Boston, a gale arose, and they returned to the Qadir, leaving the Winthrop to her ghostly fate in the storm. You know what that makes me think about? Some of these other instances that we read about, these ships would be sailing, it'd be both ships and planes, aircraft. They see bright sunny skies, clear visibility, no fog, right? Some of these encounters, one of them said about like a fog disc that started to like lift up from the water and form a pillar, and it just started going up like that. And sometimes these ships could not avoid that. Planes as well. I'm wondering if whatever forces that pushed these people off of the Winthrop made them evacuate their ship. I wonder if that same thing or anomaly I wonder if that's responsible for the gale that rose when the crew of the Qadir tried to board the Winthrop. Almost like a warning to get out of there. At this point in time, I am under the impression that there's an intelligence behind this phenomenon, and that it's manipulating people. So just imagine an unseen entity that can just cue weather up on a whim, just because it doesn't like that another ship is checking out an abandoned ship. That same entity also made the original occupants abandon that abandoned ship. Almost like it's laying claim to that abandoned ship, like it wants it to sink. And then there's all of these accounts where we don't find the missing crewmen. We find the boats, we find the planes, we don't find the people. And this entire area in the Bermuda is very shallow. You could see the bottom of the ocean. It's that shallow. But you can't find any of these survivors? What happened to these crewmen? What happened to these pilots? I do think that there's intelligence at play here. That's manipulating weather. That's possibly abducting these people. So again, Tuesday's show, the Philadelphia experiment that we just had 2 days ago. They were talking about... Oh man, I don't want to lose this thought here. They were talking about how the missing people in the Bermuda Triangle are not dead. That they're actually okay. Like they passed through into a different dimension and they're okay. And I guess that's the best feel-good ending you could have from this. Is knowing that these people didn't die. They're just in a different they're in a different realm. But they're not dead. Alright, let's finish this Qadir and Winthrop story. Nearing Boston, the Abd el-Qadir then encountered the Tern, or three-masted schooner, Kate Brigham, It's the name of the ship. Perfectly sound, but deserted. So nothing wrong with it. She was bound from New York to Le Havre with a cargo of petroleum. Sparrow docked the 24th, or he docked on the 24th, reporting 2 mysteries of the sea. Exasperated by such abandonments, the New York Times reporter denounced them on March 31st. Quote, "What can be the matter with the crews of American vessels that they thus abandon their ships and vanish into the unknown? Their vessels were not abandoned because they could no longer protect their crews from the elements. Neither could the motive of their abandonment have been the desire to defraud the insurance companies, for in that case the vessels would have been scuttled. Can it be that the Flying Dutchman has crossed the equator in search of forced recruits for his venerable crew?" And then end quote. In parentheses, this says, according to Lloyd's, the crews from both vessels were actually saved. See? End parentheses. A far more eerie encounter supposedly befell the Ellen Austin in 1881 when she came upon the same derelict twice. The first time she encountered the nameless vessel was north of the Sargasso Sea. Her master placed a prize crew aboard, and in tandem both vessels sailed on to New York. About 2 days later, the Ellen Austin and the nameless schooner were parted by a squall. When the squall dissipated, the schooner had vanished along with the Ellen Austin's prize crew. No trace was ever found of the vessel. The Ellen Austin crew, teeming with superstition, sailed on for New York. Another retelling has the Austin finding the nameless schooner again. This time the schooner was sailing erratically. When they boarded her again, they found the prize crew had also vanished. So the crew they put on the ship to bring it back home, that crew also disappeared. As had the original crew. So when they boarded her again, they found the prize crew had also vanished, as had the original crew. There they left the cursed drifter to rot at sea. So they didn't board it again. The vessel floated away, a ghostly portal to another world. It is very possible that the publicized affair of the Abd el-Qadir influenced the story of the Ellen Austin. Yet, as we know, it would not have been impossible, even unlikely, for a ship to have encountered 2 derelicts on this route, much less the same one twice. As a London to New York packet, the Ellen Austin most definitely sailed the sea lanes attributed to her in the legend, and was frequently in a position north of the Sargasso Sea to encounter the many derelicts that drifted out of the Bermuda Triangle. In the 19th century, the Sargasso Sea's reputation essentially only fed off the crumbs of the as yet unnamed Bermuda Triangle. A fraction of the many derelicts found drifting in the currents from the triangle had funneled into its stagnant clutches. There they sat, some perhaps for years, helping to build the legend of the, quote, Sea of Lost Ships, end quote, or, quote, Port of Missing Vessels, end quote. Few ghost ships have ever drifted out of the Sargasso Sea to make a real port on their own. However, this is the case with the bark Vincenzo Perrotta. She was the first spotted northeast of Bermuda on September 17th, 1887. She therefore drifted 2,950 miles over 536 days to finally end up at Watling Island in the Bahamas. In that time, 27 ships reported her, and each carried a tale of mystery to some foreign port. We're getting to some good accounts here. There's actually one I'm looking forward to reading on the next page. Few ships ever drifted out of the clutches of the currents. Legends of eternal and cursed drifters have a basis in fact. The legends are probably partially based on the actual drift of the Tern Fanny E. Wollston. So that's the name of the ship. She was first reported derelict on October 15th, 1891, west of Bermuda in the Gulf Stream, and last reported as of the publishing of the Hydrographic Office's 1894 wreck report on February 20th, 1894, just a little southwest of that position, up current from where she had been reported before. So that's another thing. This abandoned ship is not manned by anyone, and it's sailing up current? Explain that one. Ghost ships sailing up current. She had not remained in a void and drifted against the powerful current. So it's not only oh man. A powerful current, and it's going upstream of it, and there's no one on the ship. Reports by other ships in those intervening years make it clear that the Tern had drifted in the currents around the Sargasso Sea and had come back to the place where she was first sighted or abandoned. So it made a circle? That's some weird timing to see it in a different place like that. So it made a circle then. Possibly. Allegedly. 6B writes, quote, "She has therefore been a derelict for 850 days, during which she drifted 7,025 miles, the longest track of the kind on record. And as she is supposed to be afloat yet, her track will probably be still further extended," end quote. Published reports, such as the aforementioned Hydrographic Office report, titled Wrecks and Derelicts of the North Atlantic, 1887 to 1893, inclusive, were few and far between. How many times was a ghostly Tern sighted thereafter? How many years did she continue to haunt the Atlantic? Did she make yet another complete orbit of the huge Sargasso Sea? Was she in limbo for many more years? Obviously, the legends of ghostly derelicts are quite real. Maybe the Fanny Wollston is not so dramatic, but she is a worthy inspiration for eerie elaboration. 3.5, perhaps 4 or more years of drifting at sea, being sighted by countless ships, and specifically 34 ships by the time of the report, in parentheses, is enough to inspire a great and substantive sea yarn. As her legend grew, as more and more ships reported the vessel still miraculously afloat and never reboarded or hauled to port, how many ships started to give her a wide berth? She earned the reputation as a damned ship, and for this reason she was never towed to port so that any master might dine from her bones in the court of salvage. She continued on until Judgment Day buried her and her clues. One alarming incident gives us an idea of what might frighten men from a sound ship in the seas west of Bermuda. This is what I want to get into. It was on the cusp of the Sargasso Sea in 1904, in the precise area where most derelicts had been sighted, that the British ship Mohican had a bizarre encounter. It was reported by the New York Times and the Philadelphia Inquirer on July 31st, 1904. Just give me one moment here. So this next story intrigues me greatly. It's titled Electric Cloud Enveloped Ship. Caused Mohican's sailors to become like animated magnets. Let me reread that. Electric cloud enveloped ship caused Mohican's sailors to become like animated magnets. Compass was set a-spinning, and iron chains could not be lifted from the deck. So there is absolutely magnetism involved here. When the British steamer Mohican from Ibralia, Romania, that's spelled Roumania, which reached this port on Saturday, was making for the Delaware breakwater. It had a most remarkable experience which terrorized the crew, played havoc with the ship's compass, and brought the vessel to a standstill for nearly a half hour. So it did go over a magnet then. How can a ship stand still for nearly a half hour? It went over a pocket of magnetism, right? The source of this magnetism is still up for debate. For that length of time, the vessel was enshrouded in a strange metallic vapor, which glowed like phosphorus. This is not unlike the Philadelphia experiment claims. So again, go watch that Tuesday show if you haven't yet. The entire vessel looked as if it were afire. And the sailors fitted about the deck like glowing phantoms. This is just like Philadelphia Experiment, but this is 1904. This is 1904. This isn't... Oh, man. The Philadelphia Experiment happened much later. The cloud had a strange magnetic effect on the vessel. For the needle of the compass revolved with the speed of an electric motor, and the sailors were unable to raise pieces of steel from the magnetized decks. Captain Urquhart, spelled Urquhart, described the thrilling experience, and his story is vouched for by every man of the crew. So get this. Quote, "It was shortly after the sun had gone, and we were in latitude 37 degrees, 16 minutes. Ah, there it is again. So when I have been saying like X degrees, and then I say feet and inches, it's actually minutes and seconds. I'm learning here along with you guys. Let me restart this quote. It was shortly after the sun had gone, and we were in latitude 37 degrees, 16 minutes, and longitude 72 degrees, 48 minutes. The sea was almost as level as a parlor carpet, and scarcely a breeze ruffled the water. It was slowly growing dark when the lookout saw a strange gray cloud in the southeast. At first it appeared as a speck on the horizon, but it rapidly came nearer and was soon as large as a balloon." End quote. I wonder if they mean like a hot air balloon. And that's end quote there. So now there's a few other quotes that have headings here, so I'm going to read that. Ship in shining cloud. Quote, "It had a peculiar gray tinge, and as it bore down upon us, we saw bright glowing spots in its mass. A mile away, we perceived that it rose several hundred feet above the level of the sea, and was almost that broad. It rolled over the sea toward us, the glowing spots becoming more and more vivid. Suddenly, the cloud enveloped the ship, and the most remarkable phenomena took place. The Mohican suddenly blazed forth like a ship on fire. And from stem to stern and topmast to keel, everything was tinged with the strange glow. The seamen were in terror when they found themselves looking as if they had been immersed in hellfire. Their hair stood straight on end, not from the fright so much as from the magnetic power of the cloud." And this quote continues, "They rushed about the deck in consternation, and the more they rushed about, the more excited they became. I tried to calm them, but the situation was beyond me. I looked at the compass needle, and it was flying around like an electric fan. I ordered several of the crew to move some iron chains that were lying on the deck, thinking that it would distract their attention. But what was the surprise to find that the sailors could not budge the chains, although they did not weigh more than 75 pounds each. Everything was magnetized, and chains, bolts, spikes, and bars were as tight on the deck as if they had been riveted there. End quote. The second heading here says, hair on heads stood out. Quote, the cloud was so dense that it was impossible for the vessel to proceed. I could not see beyond the decks, and it appeared as if the whole world was a mass of glowing fire. The frightened sailors fell on the decks and prayed. I never saw anything so terrifying in the years I have been at sea. The hair on our heads and in our beards stuck out like bristles on a pig. So, you know, like you go to these science fairs when you were younger and they had the Tesla coil and you put your hand on it and all your hair stood up? That's what was happening here to these crewmates. All of them. So not only is there magnetics involved, there's also electricity involved. And this is 1904. Let's continue with this quote. After we had been in the cloud for about 10 minutes, we noticed that it became difficult to move our arms and legs. In fact, all the joints of the body seemed to stiffen. Then it was that my sea legs began to fail me for the first time. I've heard of phantom ships and stories about the needle running wild, but shiver me if I had ever seen the like of that. For a half hour, we were enveloped in that mysterious vapor. And for nearly all that time, after the sailors' first cries of fright had subsided, there was a great silence over everything that only added to the terror. I tried to talk, but the words refused to leave my lips. The density of the cloud was so great that it would not carry sound. Suddenly, the cloud began to lift. The phosphorescent glow of the ship and the crew began to fade. It gradually died away, and at the same time, the stiffness left the air. In a few minutes, the cloud had passed over the vessel, and we saw it moving off over the sea. It loomed above the water as a great gray mass, spotted like a leopard's back with the bright, glowing patches. Wow. Unreal. Like, just try visualizing this thing. They were with this for a half hour, and then they couldn't move or speak. Terrifying. There we have GOD77 here. Yissilmissil bruv, good morning from the UK. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. We're on one of the wildest stories that I consider this, like, magnetic cloud thing to be, like, the core of what this mystery is. And we're getting a first-hand account here, like, word for word. It's a quote from the Philadelphia Inquirer on July 31st, 1904. Like, this guy and all of his crew vouched for this too. So they all survived this. But let's continue this quote here because it keeps going. The crew gradually regained their composure and whispered to one another. I went among them, telling that all danger was past, and they slowly went about their work. Yeah, imagine having to like shake that off and be like, all right, back to work, boys. Like, whatever, just forget about what just happened. Get back to putting the mast up and moving us along here. I went among them, telling that all danger was past, and they slowly went about their work. When I ordered them to move the iron chains for a second time, the men had no trouble in lifting them from the deck and tossing them about. Then I took a look at the needle, and it was pointing steadily toward the north, as if nothing had occurred. I have sailed the seas for many years, but I never encountered a cloud like that. It must have been composed of some magnetized substance, which at the same time was combined with phosphorus. And we all know what the phosphorus smell means, right? So is this possibly demonic? It's not out of the question. Alright. Lying buried in the archives until it was rediscovered in the early 21st century, this story of the sea gives us a disturbing foreshadow of what the 1970s would be termed the, quote, electronic fog. This latter era, a time in which the Mohican report, though startlingly suggestive, was inaccessible and could not have provided any inspiration for imaginative storytellers. Basically, like, these stories were suppressed for a very long time. And it wasn't until early 2000s this 1904 story resurfaced. So even though it was published in the newspapers, this thing got buried from the public knowledge. In the early 21st century, the Mohican account continued to gain recognition because it was oddly similar to these recent and independent accounts of survivors of unusual encounters in the Bermuda Triangle. Each of them speaking about weird, quote, electronic fog, end quote. Strange lenticular clouds with magnetic properties, and unexplained periods where compass needles went haywire or crazy. Unlike with the Mohicans' strange encounter, the sum total of modern data has been pointing to far more alarming potential for travelers than a brief interlude with a strange phenomenon. And Without a Trace, compiled in 1977, Charles Berlitz noted, quote, on a few occasions when a ship or plane has been seen to disappear, a paradoxical expression at best, in parentheses, it has first been covered by what appears to be an electromagnetic fog, or, in the case of planes, a cloud into which planes fly but from which they do not exit, end quote. I'm just taking a note of this other Berlitz book. Among the disappearance of large vessels, the case of the Cyclops is particularly striking. At 520 feet in length and with a crew of 309 men aboard, the total disappearance of this U.S. Navy auxiliary cargo vessel constitutes the number one tragedy in terms of life lost. And in parentheses it says presumed. Because we also have accounts of these crew members they're not gone or missing. They're in another place still living. Where is up to debate. So at 520 feet in length and with a crew of 309 men aboard, the total disappearance of this U.S. Navy auxiliary cargo vessel constitutes the number one tragedy in terms of life presumed lost in the Bermuda Triangle. The vessel had last touched port unexpectedly at Barbados in the West Indies, and from there left on March 4th, 1918 for Baltimore. The weather was excellent, but the vessel never arrived, and no trace was found in a protracted search conducted by the U.S. Navy. All the elements come together in this last voyage to rank it with the greatest sea tales. Her master, Captain Worley, was more hated by his own crew than William Bling was hated amongst those of the Bounty. The Bounty being another ship. That's the name of it. Furthermore, he was known to be pro-German. And this is what, World War I? Post-World War I? And even to keep a pro-German clique about him on the ship. He was abusive, cruel, and even given to drunkenness. The plot that played out may have less to do with the Triangle and more to do with the Navy's original fear that mutiny or treason had occurred. And in parentheses it says, see A Passage to Oblivion. I have the book. That's this author's other book. Passage into Oblivion. Or A Passage to Oblivion. And that covers in detail this specific account with the Cyclops. And at some point, I do want to thoroughly read that book on this series as well. I have multiple things here. Gian J. Quasar also wrote a book about Amelia Earhart. I do want to look into that as well. So there's a lot of information and content that we'll be putting together here in this series. It's going to be ongoing for the foreseeable future. We have shows through March right now, just with this book through March. But that's the only way we're going to absorb it, is just taking the time going through it. And we have 3.5 pages left for today, so we're almost done. Went a little over an hour here already. So, again, thanks for being here. Please remember to hit the like button. Share this to anyone who you think would like hearing about this stuff. If it intrigues them, just network. That's the only way this is gonna get around to people, and it's gonna find the right people. Again, I wouldn't really have it any other way. This is the way it's meant to be here. Between the wars, ships that vanished included the Cotopaxi, last heard from off Florida on December 1st, 1925, reporting she had water in her hold. In March 1926, the freighter Sodufco disappeared on a course from Port Newark to the Panama Canal. The tramp freighter Anglo-Australian, that's the name of it, was last passing the Azores in March 1938 when she signaled, quote, all well, end quote, and thereafter, like the Sam Key, name of another ship, was never seen again. Battered but unsinkable due to her lumber cargo, the freighter slash schooner Gloria Colita was found abandoned in the Gulf of Mexico in February 1940 and towed to Mobile, Alabama by the Coast Guard. With the advent of World War II, the cruel sport of war dominated the North Atlantic. Unexpected debris would signal not mystery to the crew of a passing freighter, but the present dangers of a surface raider or U-boats. It is with a new phenomenon, the disappearance of aircraft, that we can be more certain of mystery rather than the effects of war as the cause for inexplicable loss. The training and patrol requirements of the U.S. war effort created the perfect environment for close-to-shore flights, many of them based in Florida, far from the dangers of the war zone. The disappearance of an 047B is particularly intriguing for the circumstantial similarities to Flight 19, inasmuch as it had pilot Lieutenant Marsh Hemingway and 2 crew. The weather was nearly identical, and in parentheses, a southwest trade wind up to 35 knots. Unusual radio interference occurred to both planes in the patrol, and the fact that as one of 2 patrol aircraft which had taken off from Key West on the morning of February 15th, 1942, to patrol the dry Tortugas, a limited area, it seems to have been selectively taken without any warning, except that both planes experienced a draining of their radio transmitters. About 9:10 a.m., the companion patrol airplane piloted by Lieutenant Gian J, and his last name spelled Tuite, had its last visual contact with Lieutenant Hemingway's patrol aircraft. And this is Lieutenant Hemingway's name is spelled Hemenway. So not Hemingway, but Hemingway. It was 10 miles distant, heading northeast, 030 degrees from the dry Tortugas. In a rather nebulous entry in the report, it is then stated, quote, Lieutenant Tuite and Lawley, the radio man, reported that at this time they cited what they thought might be a suspicious circumstance existed and proceeded to return to companionship, end quote. However, Lieutenant Hemingway's aircraft was no longer visible. Tuite's radio man, Lieutenant Lawley, now contacted Hemingway's aircraft in order to ask Hemingway to take up a heading of 90 degrees so that their paths would cross and they could rejoin. However, Lawley noted that his radio transmission and reception were weak. This was unsettling because the same thing had happened earlier to Hemingway's aircraft. Lawley had overheard Hemingway's radio man, Lieutenant Kelly, report to Key West that his radio transmission and reception were weak. So Lawley's weak reception seemed more than an odd coincidence. It was so weak that when Kelly now responded to Lawley's request, all that Lawley could hear was a very weak, quote, Roger, end quote. This was the last heard from Hemingway's patrol aircraft. And we have an inset paragraph here. So it says, companion ship circled navigation buoy east of Dry Tortugas for some time and also circled Marquesas Sea. An attempt to relocate the missing plane, but no visual contact was made. Ship circled Key West Airport ship circled Key West Airport as well and landed at Key West at 10:15 a.m. During this time, Lieutenant Lawley reports that his radio failed to operate and he had no contact with the missing plane or ground station. Upon arrival at Key West, he used the radio of another plane to ask the ground station to contact 2YZ, which was the Hemingway, and report his arrival at Key West. The response was also negative, not so surprising considering that Lieutenant Kelly, Hemingway's radio operator, had earlier also reported his radio getting weaker. Both aircraft encountering this is a rather unusual coincidence. If it was, and if it was not, the commas are getting me here. Both aircraft encountering this is a rather unusual coincidence if it was. And if it was not, then it is an indication of some electromagnetic drain, a particularly alarming element when one of them then vanishes. What prompted Tuitt and Lawley to interpret some event as suspicious and warranting both aircraft to join up is not clarified, but they never pursued whatever it had been. The rest of their patrol was taken up trying to locate Hemingway. As would become the norm, a full search never found a trace, despite the aircraft having a very limited patrol area. On June 21st, 1943, a Navy Ventura, a two-engine light bomber with 5 crew, took off from Boca Chica, Key West at 12:50 p.m. for a practice bombing run offshore. It headed into the exact area where Hemingway had vanished. Or after it had headed into the exact area where Hemingway had vanished, it must have disappeared. The flight was to be quite short. They were due back by 2:30 p.m. The practice bombs were only basic water-filled bombs. An exhaustive search was commenced within the hour without finding a trace. Officially, all aboard were declared to have drowned, although in a confidential memo from the Judge Advocate General's Office to Naval Operations, the Assistant JAG, or JAG, the Judge Advocate General, stated cautiously, quote, "While there is possibility that the plane crashed and all aboard were killed, there is no definite evidence to that effect," end quote. The only recommendation was an officious one, that the pilots and crew be declared missing for 12 months and then declared dead, which was done on June 22nd, 1944. A B-24 Liberator bomber was a considerably larger aircraft with 4 engines and 8 crew. One in RAF service departed Nassau on April 24th, 1944, bound for Key West. Jack Burgess, who knew the pilot, Ken Cameron, participated in the search for the aircraft and later wrote an article about his experience. He observed that the plane and, quote, crew were never seen or heard of again. They never reached Key West, and although they carried instructors, including a fully qualified and experienced wireless operator instructor, No signal or message was ever received by the many ships, aircraft, or agencies who would have been listening out for them and others. Along with other crews, we looked for any sign of wreckage or dinghies for 9-hour searches over the next few days. End quote. Although the Bermuda Triangle was not a term in effect yet, after the 5 Avengers of Flight 19 vanished in 1945, Burgess came to feel that what had happened to his friend and the B-24 could only be explained by this same phenomenon. He considered this incident, quote, our first taste of losing an aircraft and crew in strange, mysterious circumstances and such splendid, peaceful conditions, end quote. In a sense, we have come full circle again, back to peacetime, and December of 1945, when there was no hindrance to reporting the disappearance of aircraft and all that attended their vanishings, no matter how unusual. There is, however, a limit to what we can learn from the past, especially from the muster of the lost ships on long voyages. Aircraft, on the other hand, are closely monitored and are, relatively speaking, only a short time in transit. It is the disappearance of aircraft that essentially gave us the shape and concept of the Bermuda Triangle. Advances in radar, radio communication, flight plans, and automatic alarms give us details impossible to glean from any ship disappearance, some perhaps unwelcome in their implications. The continuing disappearance of aircraft in the modern era has revealed to us the unusual circumstances and disappearances that cannot seemingly be explained by pilot error, structural failure, or foul weather. In other words, there are no easy answers to these missing aircraft. And that is the end of chapter 3. What a lot to take in, huh? Alright, let's check the chat here. I kind of ignored you guys a little bit. God77 says, yes, it's like DDN or something like that. Or something like a portal, maybe. I think it's like a magneto-electric entity. That's what I think we're dealing with. So, like, how else do you explain this stuff? So I had to get my place in the book here again. Missing Time says, almost makes me not want to get on a boat. Yeah, me neither, man. Like, I don't... There's a... Chris Jericho, the pro wrestler, he's doing a... What do you call those things? He's doing some sort of trip around the Bahamas. He's doing a sail thing. A cruise ship, that's what it is. He's going to the Bahamas, like, in September. Like, as much of a pro wrestling fan as I am, and as poor as I am, like, I'm not going to be affording $2,500 tickets for a cruise. Like, even though I think that would be awesome to do, I can't find myself to take a trip to the Bahamas like that, especially with all this going on, right? I think doing that with a plane would be even worse. Missing Time also says, I'm thinking of the smoke monster from Lost. Yes. Although that thing had, like, sound effects and noises and stuff, it seems like this thing just, like, zaps all sound. Very bizarre. And Woo Riders is here. Says, hey, Steve and Steve's mustache. Good to see you, man. Hey, we're both happy to see you. God77 says, me Julie's uncle was one of 1,500 people, the HMS Hood, that was sunken by the Bismarck, Germany's biggest ship at the time in World War II. I'm sorry to hear that, man. 1,500 people. That, you know, as we got into World War II, these ships just became enormous. So, like, we're talking about ships with crews of like 30 or so disappearing, sometimes 100. But you're saying 1,500 people? And I know if you look at these logs from, like, the military records, you'll see how many people were on these ships. But I don't do that sort of thing on the regular, so that's kind of new news to me. But yeah, I really want to know what happens to these people. So is this thing like shifting dimensions and just kidnapping people into another dimension? Like, they're not killing them, but they're taking them somewhere else. That's what it seems like to me. That's what it seems like what's going on. But who knows? Who knows? Real briefly here, I want to show what we're doing for next week. So next Tuesday, so Sunday we're having a show. We're doing Let's Talk About It, so I hope you all can be there Sunday morning around 11 CST, Central Standard Time. 11 a.m. Central Time. That's Sunday. But Tuesday we're continuing Coral Castle Deep Dive. We're going to be talking about ley lines and the meaning of Adam, and that's going to be a 2-part chapter. So we're only going to cover part 1 of that chapter on Tuesday, and then the following week we'll finish up that chapter. Next week's Bermuda Triangle show, again, every Thursday we're going to do this 6 p.m. Central Time. Next week's show is covering chapter 4. I'll show it right here. Aircraft damage and injury index presumed. So we'll be covering that. And it seems like we'll do the whole chapter. Let me just see how many. Yeah, there's... They're not kidding when they say index. That's the number that counts. It just keeps going. 137 missing planes to cover. And then we have missing vessels after that. Holy moly. Up to 110. So we'll be covering, what, 237? Is that right? Give me a sec. 137... 247 planes and ships combined. That's what we're going to cover next week, Thursday. And it's basically bullet points, and there's also photographs at the end of some of these ships and planes, so that'll be cool to take a look at. But yeah, next week's show most likely will go over 2 hours. And I'm okay with that. So we got to get through this. So we're not even a quarter of the way through. Not even a quarter. But this is what we'll be covering next week, Thursday. My next live show is going to be on Sunday morning. And we're going to update what's been happening in that realm with the Matrix. Okay. So God77 says only 3 survived out of the 1,500. Wow. And they're fortunate to have survived, too, to share their story. Just imagine all of these other people that they're gone. It's not that they were bombed or anything. These people just go missing off the ships and planes. Oh. It's definitely something to think about. What's really going on over there. I am maxed out for today, though. So thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. And make sure, again, to like this video. And if you're rewatching it later and you have questions or comments, leave them below and I'll get to them. So it's not a big deal. I do like engaging with the people watching here and all you guys, subscribers and non-subscribers. I want to get this to the right people, okay? Those who seek this out will find it. That's all I'll say. So, until the next one, take care of yourselves. And class dismissed.